This is Monica Perez, and if you were here this time last week, and you follow me on Twitter, for example, you will know that much has happened since then. And I haven't really, I did one thing, I did cognitive dissonance, which I had already had planned with Hervoye and Parallel Mike, and I was glad because that kind of got my story out there, but I haven't really done any podcasts. I'm still reeling from this Altadena fire. It's called the Eaton Fire, but it's just basically wiped out my town, my entire neighborhood, thousands and thousands of houses. It's insane um, how close it was to, like, if you look at a map of the blast zone, there's just like, it looks like a finger, like a little finger of God that reaches up. And I always think he's like dropping a drop of water on my house. And like that's it. So it's like blast zone and this little finger of like saved houses, and my house is the top one. It's pretty crazy. So obviously I'm the lucky one. I feel bad for the people who lost their houses. I know so many people who did. And so it's like a weird feeling because I lost a lot. Like it's not cool. This isn't Oprah, like 40 acres overlooking the ocean. And you know what? I didn't really like my neighbors anyway. No, like this is really just it's ruining it. It's such a nice place, and now it's like being on the moon. It's crazy. But what I was thinking was there's just a few things I want to tell you, and then I have to get my mind out of this. I haven't even been able to watch TV, read a book. Like I cannot get my head out of this. So I'm trying to change gears, and of course, you should stay positive. And I just thought a really nice way of like doing a connecting and not having to like read the news and stuff is if we get back to the book reading. So today is The Makers of the Modern Mind, and we are doing this is part 5, but it's the this shoot, is this part 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think this might be part 6. I don't know. I'm getting confused about it. So all I will say is this is our second part for Descartes. So we did Luther in 2 parts, we did Calvin in 2 parts, and we're doing Descartes in 2 parts. But I wanted to just say a few things about what happened last time. So the last time we did this, I was like, look, I don't like to talk about stuff that's topical when we're just doing a book reading because it should be evergreen. But they're about to turn out my power, and I've got to, I want to get this out before I have to vacate my premises if it's a couple of days. They said they're going to shut it a couple of days. So that was from 2 to 3 Pacific. As soon as I finished, I went and put a load of laundry in because I just was taking the chance, and it's stuck in there. So and my husband texted me. He was a little annoyed. He was like, "That's my favorite shirt. If it gets stuck in there," and it is. So it's at 3:39 p.m. the power went out. So we decided to, like, I don't know, we were kind of thinking of going to a hotel, but we ended up, let's go to dinner and think about it. When we got back from dinner, the mountain in front of our house was on fire. So that was 6:30. So anyone who says, like, power lines, whatever, you have to explain it to me because it was absolutely pitch black as far as the eye could see after the sun went down. And I could see the fire starting underneath the like, it looked like an Eiffel Tower kind of power line thing, but we're like, how is that possible? And I had already thought, well, if this is some kind of intentional thing, I mean, if it's just a lone nut, okay, that's one thing, but if it were like intentional, it would be you would start without you wanting people to know. You would start it right under there, and you'd wait for the Santa Ana winds, which are pretty predictable, wait for a dry year, start it there. So even the firefighters like, oh yeah, rumor has it, fire bug. So it's like, oh yeah, I know him. His name is Klaus. So anyway, but nothing, I didn't see anything. There are many, many things about how dereliction of duty contributed and not clearing out that brush. A lot of bad policies. Water ran out. I'm going to do a show on like 10 fishy things and 10 agenda items. I saw the fire jumping from tree to tree and house to house. Like, I didn't think there was anything weird like that. No laser beams or anything. Why do some trees burn and some didn't? You could see it. Like the palms did not seem to go down too hard. I think oaks are resilient for some reason. I don't know. So I'll go through all that, but Anyway, if you want to see a few pictures that I had, you can go to Twitter. I'll bring those if I do a show on this, maybe next week. I'm displaced for a while. We're getting an Airbnb because I got to get the bunnies back and the dogs. I'll get it. But a few things I wanted to just say and then go on. I wanted to tell you about the power outage. I thought this was funny. So when we were leaving, it was dark, so I couldn't. It was hard to pack in the dark, so I couldn't like wrap these up and put them in a like a jewelry box. They're usually just hanging by my bedside. Just if I wear silver, I'll wear a silver one. If I wear gold, I'll wear the gold, and my two crosses. And they're so tangled up, I can't get them off now. So I guess I'll be forever. I hate gold and silver together. Generally, I guess I'll have to do that, but it's just funny. So I was stuck with these two crosses. Maybe it was a good thing. Um, I I did note I do have a donation button on my website. It's not for like me as a fire victim. I usually just about break even and I'm not doing shows. So if you want to donate just to keep the show going, I have some expenses. I'd rather not dip into the family, savings account. So you can go to monicaperezshow.com and there's a donate. There's a donut button. It should be just a donut. Anyway, there's a donate button up there. And if you care, just a couple of bucks to get me through this month. Um, and this is a little thing that I thought was interesting. Oh, shit. Can you wait a second while I go get my phone? Oh, I might have it here. Hold on. I want it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Is it here? Is it here? Is it everything? I think so. Okay. So Stella, hi Stella, hit that donut button. Exactly. So how did my house get saved? I think there were five things. I think it was the wind. Firefighters came by because the patio went up, the fence went up, the neighbor's house went up. And I think so the firefighters, I think they did that because we were all our houses were made of stucco. Mine is stucco with a terracotta roof. So as my son says, it's called mission style. The missionaries built it to resist fire because Indians don't like missionaries. It was like, good point. So I think they decided to save it, which is what they were doing for a good reason. My neighbor stayed all night. He's still there. And he was dousing embers, like every one of those things. And he said he saw like the wind change direction here and there. All those things contributed. But personally, I think it was just a miracle. Like those things were all part of the miracle. And this is how the miracle happened. So when did you start texting me, Stella? Stella's texting me. How's it going? Show her this picture. I wonder if I think I can share this picture that I showed her. I didn't like figure out how to share pictures before the show because I just didn't feel like dealing with that. But here I can share this. I just figured out how to share that one. So I shared her that picture. This is, I mean, we went to sleep after that. We looked at that. We're like, you know what? This house is 100 years old. It's not going anywhere. And other neighbors were out there saying the same thing on our side of the street. But my husband was sleeping with one ear open, and he started hearing explosions. And then he got up and it was like I think it was 3:39 exactly that he either got up or we left. And he said, "There's embers." Fiery embers raining down the back of our house. So we scrambled, we had stuff packed, but those dumb bunnies and this crazy dog, my son has Down syndrome, like that's why we didn't like evacuate earlier. So Stella says, "Oh, that looks scary. I can relate. I want to encourage you that it looks bad, but I've also seen that orangeness living on the edge of a national park. It's nerve-wracking, but we made it relatively unscathed, and so will you. I can see your mother's crosses necklace on your neck." Then she's very encouraging. I said, she said, "Oh, you might be okay," something like that. And I said, "I'm downtown." She's like, she's worried about my safety. I said, "Don't worry about that. I'm downtown." And then I texted, "I doubt our house will survive. Our street is on fire." So what was happening was we were watching NBC and they were showing our street. And that was kind of shocking because our street was the street that, how do I not get that back? Our street was the street that everyone's like, well, that doesn't go on fire. That one doesn't go on fire. So she says, okay. Well, then all that's left is belief at this point. It is possible. I've been where you are and survived, so it is possible. Don't doubt. I said, okay. She said, I hope, Stella, that you don't mind that I'm reading some of our texts. Yeah, she doesn't care. So you said, I'm seeing you, and Stella's done this for me before, and she's really taught me never to visualize bad stuff, only to visualize the good stuff. So she said, I'm seeing you at the mic, being thankful for your blessings. I said, I am. We are lucky we got out unscathed. And she said, oh, I'm crying. I said, don't, I'm not. I had too many books anyway. So she says, so is your house okay? I said, unlikely. This is far from over and they're not fighting it. So when we left, we saw fire engines on the bottom of the street doing nothing, because of the wind, but I'm pretty sure. But the news was saying, yeah, they're in there fighting. I'm like, don't lie. I saw them. They're not, but it's the wind. It's crazy. Well, that was when we left at 4. She says, I'm still confident. Stucco and tile is beautiful and organic. And I said, I think I just saw my house on the news. She said, yeah, but maybe not. Your mind might have been playing tricks. Be thankful. See yourself in your studio. And I said, well, it could have just been the tree in front of your house. But it wasn't. It was my house on fire. And let me see if I can find the picture from the news of the I didn't think I was going to get through all this stuff. So, I'm going to show you this. I'll just show you this one picture. Anyway, so she's telling me like, don't panic, don't panic, don't panic. And I'm thinking, anyway, I won't go through it all. But yes, so I'm watching my house on the news. Like it's very clear. But when I was looking at the picture, which I can't find right now, and I'm not going to go through that. When I was looking at the picture, I'll show it to you next time. What I wasn't registering is that there were lights behind her. So I'm sure this journalist found where the firemen were. They were fighting my house. I found out like at 4:00 that afternoon. They were like, how is my backyard, my porch completely burned up? The back house of the neighbor burned up. Our fence burned up. And my house is unscathed. Like it was a mystery. We're like, wow, that's weird. But I knew my other neighbor was putting out fires all night. So I was like, well, maybe that's it. But the firefighters came by later and everyone's like all down on the DEI. Well, this chick definitely, she saved my house. So she made a decision to save the house. But the real thing was, I think, so Stella had it in my head, like, don't give up hope. And I'd seen my house burning. And my son and I said, let's just go look at it. Let's just go, like, put a nail in this thing and see. And we went and we got in the car. And like, I've been kind of not praying very much for things like I used to when my mother was alive. I'm in this like weird, dead zone of prayer and all that. And I said, like, we better say a rosary. And I thought of Stella. It's like, don't give up hope. And I thought of, can you ask for things? I said this on the cognitive dissonance, which I did the other day. And I asked to save the house. And if you didn't hear the other one, I was hearing my mother, because she would say this all the time. Like, I don't know if I want to ask for whatever, sunny day for my son's party. She's like, ask for what you want. Ask him, save my house. So I asked, and 2 Hail Marys in, my husband called and said, hey, our neighbor, whose name I won't tell you, but I am definitely just going to refer to him as Chad. fucking Chad called and said the house is intact. He said he can't see the other side of it, but his side of the house is intact. So, of our house. So when went up there, then we just like burst out crying. And then we went up there and I didn't know. I was like, they were like, grab a bucket. We started grabbing buckets. Like, it was nuts. Do I have that? Maybe I'll give you that picture. If it's easy to find, I'll give it to you. It's my favorite picture. So I'm sure, um, I should have it somewhere. It's a great picture because, yeah, here it is. Check this out. So when we got there, these guys, our neighbors, were dousing the embers in the trees and anywhere near the house, their houses too. Not that guy wasn't even his house. That there's another guy in there that was his house, but this one got out of control. This big flame, and the firemen came to put that out, and then said you've got to keep it going. So we got a really tall ladder and we kept it going. But that's just a crazy because this is my house over here. It's fucking crazy. And then the last one I'll show you is we went back the next day. We went back the next day and look at what we found. We went back that night to keep putting the embers out. However, we couldn't sleep in the house because it was obviously so toxic and we'd already been breathing that smoke the entire time. But so we had to go home and look at that, right? And one thing that was very touching to me was, so the next day, a few of the moms texted around like, hey, how you doing? And like one after another, my house is gone, my house is gone, my house is gone. And someone said, how about you? And I said, my house is there. And every one of them was like, oh, I'm so happy. That's so great. You had such a cute house. And like that was, I looked at those texts. It was 4 o'clock on Wednesday. It was like that. They must have just found out that their house was down. They were saying like, somebody drove by my house. It's gone, you know, and they were happy for me because I was like, weirded out. Anyway, so there's that. That's it. I mean, I'll go through the other stuff, but I cannot think about the news. I can barely read a book. So I thought, well, I got to get my head in a different mind space. Let's read together. Maybe that'll do it. So let's hit it. Descartes. Ready? All right. Descartes. Method is the important thing in Descartes. Oh, by the way, if you want to ask me questions, put just Monica, like all caps Monica, in the chat, and I'll get to them at the end of the show. Method is the important thing in Descartes' thought. If you have that right, everything will follow. If you truly desire the truth and you use the right method in pursuing it, you cannot go wrong. For error is a matter of using the wrong method or having a bad will. So we must, in fairness to Descartes, observe carefully how he sets about perfecting his method. He had observed how philosophers agreed on nothing. He had seen how their disagreement had led to the universal skepticism of persons like Montaigne. For when 5 philosophers disagree on a certain point, it stands to reason that at least 4 must be wrong, and the 5th is likely wrong too. Descartes' problem then was to find a method of verifying opinions which would stand the test of Montaigne's universal skepticism. This he believed he could do only by resorting to his system of methodic doubt. He decided to ignore everything that philosophers had done in days gone by, to pretend that no one before him had ever come to a conclusion. If he took absolutely nothing from other thinkers, it stood to reason that he could receive no error from them. But what about being mistaken himself? Descartes admitted the likelihood of his having made mistakes up to this point. So he decided to adopt the skeptical attitude of not admitting he knew anything at this point. Quote, as for the opinions which up to that time I had embraced, I thought that I could not do better than resolve at once to sweep them wholly away, that I might afterwards be in a position to admit either others more correct or even perhaps the same when they had undergone the scrutiny of reason. He did not doubt for the sake of doubting, as did the skeptics, Descartes tells us, but simply to find ground of assurance and cast aside the loose earth and sand that I may reach the rock or clay. He will pretend then that his mind is an absolute blank, that he knows absolutely nothing. He will then proceed to receive into his mind only those ideas that are truly certain, which for Descartes meant clear and distinct. The founder of rationalism here seems to involve himself in a very obvious error, one which does irreparable harm to philosophy from his day till this. For this criterion of an idea's truth is a subjective clarity and distinctness which refers to his idea of a thing, not to the thing itself. What is clear and distinct to the mind, according to Cartesian philosophy, is thereby true and certain. But nothing is more patently wrong, nor more patently egotistic. I'm thinking Magritte, I'm thinking hyper-reality, like that's where it's coming from, like in this day of screens and stuff, and CGI and deep fakes. Maybe Cartesian reasoning does fail spectacularly. There are many things in the world of which we have a very fuzzy and confused idea, but to deny their existence because we do not grasp them clearly is egoistic nonsense. Agreed. So too do we sometimes have crystal clear ideas that turn out to be absolutely wrong. Reality is bigger than our minds, not, as Descartes would have it, limited by them. Descartes will start with nothing then and accept only what he knows by clear and distinct ideas. This criterion, he decides, eliminates all sense knowledge, for his senses have deceived him in the past, and he has no guarantee that they will not deceive him again. I observe, quote, that the senses sometimes mislead us, and it is a part of prudence not to place absolute confidence in that by which we have even once been deceived. End quote. Let us suppose he requests of us that we have no eyes with which to see, no hands with which to feel, no nose nor ears with which to smell or hear. Thus Descartes rules out the world of sense knowledge and forever closes the gate through which Aristotle and St. Thomas and the world of common sense men have their knowledge come. When the rain, what else do we have? We have our senses, we have reason, we have, in my opinion, an innate understanding of right and wrong, and we have free will. Like, that's pretty much all we got. When the rain beats in our face, we are not to assert that it is raining or even that we have faces. When we bump a door in the dark and feel blood on our cut lip, we are not to assert that we have bumped anything or that we feel pain or that we have a lip that has been cut or even that there is a door which has been bumped. Where then can Descartes turn to find these ideas that will be clear and certain? He turns to the recesses of his own mind. And there he gropes for ideas that exist independently of sense knowledge, ideas which therefore have always been in his mind. See, this is what I thought Gnosticism mostly was, but I get two different reads on Gnosticism. These must be ideas with which he was born, for unless they are innate, they can come into the mind only through the senses or through direct illumination from God. Now then, if we blot out all knowledge received through the senses, what can we possibly know? Descartes answers thus, quote, we suppose that there is neither God nor sky nor bodies, and that we ourselves have neither hands nor feet, nor finally a body. But we cannot in the same way suppose that we are not, while we doubt of the truth of those things. I guess that's where it came, his famous, I think, therefore I am. That's it. I am, therefore I am, I might say. He therefore concludes, whilst I wished that all was false, it was absolutely necessary that I, who thus thought, should be somewhat, and I observed the truth, should be somewhat, and I observed the truth, I think, hence I exist, was so certain and of such evidence that no ground of doubt, however extravagant, could be alleged by the skeptics capable of shaking it. So this guy was obviously obsessed with being right, which being right doesn't always mean you're right, and it's not the only thing that matters in the world of humanity. And all he could verify was that he thinks. But you know what? Nowadays, people would even question that. They would say maybe you're a computer, that you don't actually think. But that's where I think it all breaks down. We have consciousness. We have consciousness. And that is, to me, the critical difference between us and animals, between us and machines. I don't know. Maybe dolphins have consciousness. From this first principle that he exists and that he thinks, Descartes hopes to deduce his whole philosophy. This must be done deductively by his reason, drawing upon itself alone, with no reference to things outside the mind or to the experiences of his senses. He will admit as certain, one by one, those ideas which he can deduce clearly and distinctly from his existence and from the fact of which he has immediate experience that he thinks. Only these things and nothing more are to be admitted to his body of knowledge. Thus he will preserve it from all taint of doubt and safeguard it from the attacks of the most rigid skeptic. This deductive method, applied rigorously by Descartes, makes of him an obstinate divider. By his analysis, he breaks down apparent wholes into simpler, distinct units between which the connection is clearly seen. With Descartes' followers, however, these units tend to separate from each other, each standing out strongly in its individuality, each being clearly and distinctly an independent unit. Thus, Cartesians, by the deductive method, divide the whole world up into a mosaic of things corresponding to their clear and distinct ideas, a mosaic of independent things whose interconnections cannot be known, and whose existence, therefore, can all be postulated as mutually exclusive and independent of each other. It is in this way that Descartes made an unconscious contribution to the scientism of the modern world. Yeah, so that's the thing about these people in this book. It's not them. It's the probably unconscious contribution they made. And that's where I start thinking that it's like that book, Conjuring Hitler by Preparata. This is what was desired by people who could encourage thought. You know, I'm just going to say academia, media. I don't know what was going on 500 years ago or 4. But so they take these things and they exploit them for their purposes and they get bent so that the original guy might not even agree with it anymore. This is what Maritain means when he says that because of the Cartesian method, quote, henceforth, to understand is to separate. To be intelligible is to be capable of mathematical reconstruction. To take a machine to pieces and put it together again, that is the high work of the intelligence. The mechanical explanation becomes the only conceivable type of scientific explanation. The Cartesian method will be the method of mathematics, the one science Descartes thought was capable of yielding certain truth. The mathematical method, he insisted, and this was his, quote, marvelous discovery, would be applied to all things. Again, foreshadowing of Spengler. Whom I like. Men, chickens, stones, and ideas, atoms, and dreams will all be rendered into abstract numbers. This method, by means of which much can be accomplished when the statistician philosopher remembers what he has done in rendering dollars and men and children into numbers, has by its abuse fostered much of the intellectualist tyranny of modern scholarship. Oh, the statistician philosopher. I mean, statistics, lies, damn lies, and statistics. Yeah. I hope he really fleshes this out in a way that we can understand it. I mean, I like this stuff because it's meant for the layman, but the layman in the 50s was probably better educated than we are. Yes, this is live, my dear. Hi, is this live? It is. Thank you. And yes, I used to be in Atlanta. Ron, hey, Ron, I remember you. But I moved to California and then bought a house in Altadena, which was a good thing until recently. But who knows? Maybe it'll still be good. Quest says, even in the cave, Socrates doubts, but does not renounce the senses, just that we need to acknowledge something beyond them and that we can be deceived. Yeah, there you go. Math doesn't have time, present and past, future. That's food for thought, semi-collegiate. Yeah, the statistician philosopher. Interesting. It is at the source of the cold inhumanity of modern science where human beings are turned into, quote, cases in the clinic, where human students are put through a battery of tests and classified in filing cabinets, where stark tragedy, the utter despair of parents, and the pathetic wretchedness of little children is computed in so many million missing calories, where the pathos and the crime of war are computed in so many casualties and so many billions of dollars. When I think about this fire, I think they thought probably the death toll, I'm certain, is undercounted, but let's say it's a couple of hundred people. They're like, that's nothing. Think if we got $50 billion or $100 billion or whatever of destruction, and then the government's paying to wipe your property, to wipe it. They're like, you'll never get the licenses as fast as we have them. We'll come in and wipe the property. So, think of that demolition is a transfer to insurance companies or to developers. But if you think of people, they do those calculations about cars, but on the other hand, they do the calculations about cars. They say, okay, a person is worth so much, and they, quote, allow cars because it's worth it. I say, make your own decisions about that stuff. Make your own decisions. Man, I'm going back to being an anarchist. I kind of don't believe in the system at all, but I was just like, all right, whatever. This is the system we live in. We have to deal with it. I'm going to have to start going to the council meetings and figure this stuff out. But yeah, this computational way of looking at the world is adopted by policymakers to our peril. Think of what the math that must have gone into how they did COVID. Well, that COVID policy, sick. Descartes worked, thanks a lot, Descartes. Descartes worked like the mathematician in pure abstraction. And he rendered everything he knew into the three components of thought, extension, and God. These become the only three elements with which he works and in terms of which he evolves his whole philosophy. Like the mathematician, too, Descartes goes from ideas to things rather than following the philosopher's method of going from things to ideas. What he posits of his clear and distinct idea, he will posit of the reality which it represents. This is the easy way of building the temple of knowledge, for it is all done in the mind. Following the Cartesian method, it is only necessary to build a temple inside your mind out of clear and distinct idea bricks, and behold, you can assert its existence outside your mind. Such was Descartes', this is section 5. Yeah, those people want to own everything. Dude, I know. Thank you, sweetie. Happy to be here. Yeah, land grab. I know. Thank you for praying for us. Yeah, if you want to talk at the end, let's not keep interrupting. I want to, but do this as a more timeless thing. Just type my name in all caps and then write whatever you want, and I'll go through absolutely all of those at the end. So we're on section 5 of this chapter on Descartes. Such was Descartes' method for building his temple of knowledge. What are the characteristics peculiar to his work? By what marks can it be distinguished from the works of other philosophers? Cartesian knowledge can be said, without too much oversimplification of the truth, to have 3 principal marks. It is innate, it is intuitive, and it is independent of things. It's innate, it's intuitive, and it's independent of things. These are the marks of Cartesian rationalism, and they're the marks by which philosophy was universally recognized in Western history until the time of Locke. They are marks peculiar to some extent, even of Locke's successors, who complete the Cartesian experiment by reverting logically enough to a complete skepticism, right back to the position of Montaigne, from which Descartes thought he had rescued man's mind in the nick of time. These are inhuman attributes, all of them, which characterize Cartesianism. The father of modern philosophy holds, in the first place, that knowledge is innate, that we are born with a natural inclination to form certain ideas and make certain judgments, that knowledge more or less lies deep in the recesses of our minds until, by probing in the right way, we draw it to the front of our minds where we come to know it and to be fully conscious of it. We are born with certain fixed principles planted in our minds by God. They are an inherent part of us. I think that was Noam Chomsky's original idea, that we had language embedded. Sounds very Cartesian. He was absolutely wrong, by the way. The first of these principles, of course, is that these are the inherent principles that we are born with and merely have to elicit from the recesses of our mind. First one is, I think, hence I exist. Other ideas, eternally true and unchangeable in their essences, as that of a triangle or the principle of identity, are easily discovered in the mind. Now, by the proper method of deduction, we can build our whole temple of knowledge. The brick ideas are all in the mind, put there by God when He created us. We need only uncover them, clean them up, recognize them for what they are, arrange them properly, and our temple will be built. Orderly, symmetrical, perfect, straight from the hand of God. I would like to know if what he's saying is everybody on this journey of discovering what's in there, do they go through the same journey? If you find somebody who just started, can you go back on your journey and see that they discovered the exact same truth on step 1? Because if it's true, it should be the same for everyone. But to assert that ideas are innate is to fly in the face, innate, I keep saying innate, is to fly in the face of human experience and to deny the process by which we actually obtain knowledge. Of course, Descartes' temperament may not have been, quote, to sail against the wind, but his theory of innate ideas is certainly buffeted by anyone's everyday experience. No one is born with the idea of war or of man, or of strikes, or of fire in his mind, even hidden deep in its innermost recesses. He reads about war, sees the bombing of villages as a youngster, sees soldiers transported to the front, and sees veterans, perhaps missing a leg or a thumb, return to civilian life. And he gets a pretty good idea of war. In the same way he sees what fire can do when he burns his finger with a match. And he reads what chemists say about the nature of fire. Thus, he forms an idea of fire. Well, since we're talking about fire, I can absolutely tell you the experience of fire is different from even what you think about it when you learn about it. I mean, you even know it's hot, but one thing I noticed when I was driving up in between all the houses on fire is that it was hot. Why would anything ever surprise you if it's inherently in your mind? I was surprised by that. The inhumanity of a Cartesian innate ideas is perhaps best shown by seeing a good Cartesian apply them to life about him. One of the physiocrats, an 18th century rationalist who drew up plans for a perfect society to replace the disjointed France in which he lived, tells his readers that his method will be deductive, the only valid method, and that he must deduce social laws from his mind alone. quote, as truth exists by itself and is the same in all places and at all times, so by reasoning and examination, we can arrive at it and all the practical consequences which result from it. Examples which appear to contradict these consequences prove nothing, for it is only that men have lost the way and do not have certitude and full knowledge of the truth. If, in other words, you deduce that a laissez-faire economy makes for a perfect society, the fact that millions of men and women starve while little pigs are thrown into the river and wheat is burned and rice rots in the field, what is this guy? Some kind of socialist? Gotta tolerate that. Are examples which prove nothing, quote, for it is only that men have lost the way and do not have certitude and full knowledge of the truth. I mean, I would argue with him about the definition of laissez-faire society, economy, right then and there. And so we can't even agree on the basic ideas, which are just ideas. This is the problem with Catholics sometimes. I don't know what it would be like. I'm a traditional Catholic, but the social stuff, sometimes, even like old school Catholics, maybe I have to dig into it. Maybe I have to dig into it better, because I just too inherently libertarian to really buy into that stuff. All right, the second characteristic of Cartesian knowledge is as inhuman as the first. The ideas of Descartes are not only born in the mind, they are known intuitively, grasped, as it were, in a flash of intellectualism. Now, this might be the way angels know the truth, or even perhaps the way mystics sometimes, by an extraordinary and unexplainable flight of the intellect, arrive at a conclusion. But it is not the way the mind of man ordinarily works. Men reason more or less laboriously, proceeding from principle to principle, from fact to fact, from cause to effect, step by step in logical fashion. This is the way of man's mind. We see that under certain conditions, 2 atoms of hydrogen combine with 1 oxygen to form water. From this, we arrive at a knowledge of the composition of water, and we then go on drudgingly to study its properties. But Descartes would not have us proceed thus. He would have us go by flashes, like lightning in the night sky, suddenly apprehending new truths like newly revealed vistas, hitherto completely in the dark. Thus, Descartes disowns reason, does violence to its nature, denies the normal conditions of its activity. His analysis of reason simply does not apply to man. Yeah, what about observation? Why would we even have senses? The third, and perhaps the most damaging characteristic of Cartesian knowledge, is its independence of things. Yeah, I want to know how this guy doesn't bump into a chair in the night. How does he do that if he hasn't already seen it? Our ideas do not depend on realities outside the mind. They do not depend on the senses. They depend only on the mind itself, and of course on God, their creator. An idea is no longer true if it corresponds to a reality outside the mind. It is true independently of outside reality if it is clear and distinct. One's idea of Da Vinci's Mona Lisa no longer must correspond, to be true, to the picture painted by the great Italian artist and now hung in the Louvre. Descartes has completely reversed the order of truth and of reality. He has turned knowledge inside out by cutting it away from things. By breaking loose from its moorings, in reality, such a theory of knowledge takes free flight in the world of fancy. Yeah, so it seems like you've got Luther, who says, by faith alone, and it's hopeless to really behave well. Calvin, I guess, justifies economic achievement as godly, kind of regardless. And here is, I guess this is just the roots of pure subjectivism, pure anything goes, which is what my uncle the priest said about Catholics. They had a better sense of humor because they had strict ideas of what was right and wrong. There's no subjectivism. So if you saw a man wearing a dress, you and the other guy would think it was funny because that's not what you think is right, and the other guy thinks so too. So if you have a malleable idea of what's right and wrong, you can't laugh. I'm sure I've told this joke, but so I was talking to a guy, real liberal guy when I was at law school. And I said, and this is why Bill Clinton was running. I said, what does Bill Clinton have? No, what does Ted Kennedy? It was very in poor taste. So what does Ted Kennedy have that Bill Clinton wants? And the answer was a dead girlfriend, because Bill Clinton was full of thing. And the guy, I was like, what, are you offended? I said, what do you want? Wish your girlfriend was dead? And he's like, no, but it could offend somebody. I guess it could have. But I was just thinking, who could be offended by that unless they wanted that? But I guess it was in poor taste now that I think about it. Anyway, but there are plenty of times where you try to make a joke and the other people don't get it because they've got their nose out of joint because they think that you're being insensitive. But you don't have to if you have a very clear sense of what's right and wrong. Such intellectual irresponsibility is bad enough. And has wrought enough damage in the modern world. But even worse is the tyranny of Cartesian idealism. For such a theory of knowledge seals the mind up into an airtight compartment and cuts it away from contact with anything outside of itself. Its object of intellection is the idea itself and nothing more than the idea. My natural intelligence, Descartes tells us, enables me to know, evidently, that my ideas are in me like pictures. It is only the picture that the mind sees, never the reality portrayed by the picture. Thus, Descartes has put his picture ideas between the mind and the world, and he has made it impossible for the mind ever to peek around the picture to see what is behind them. It is for this reason that the problem of existence takes foremost place in Cartesian philosophy, as it does in all modern philosophy. If we know only our ideas, how can we be sure that there is such a thing as rain or a typewriter or this book? Yeah, I never went for that, ever. Descartes will not let us know the rain or the typewriter or the book. We know only the idea of each of these things, and now our problem has become the terrific one of proving whether such things do exist. We have not denied them, but neither do we know them. This is the problem, of course, which has never bothered the farmer or the bricklayer or the shoemaker. The farmer knows that it rains and that there is ground under his feet, and that out of that ground he has nurtured crops in good years and failed to bring them forth in bad years when there was no rain. But the Cartesian theory of knowledge will only admit that the farmer has ideas of all these things. It will not admit that he can be certain of their actual existence outside of his mind. How about the fact that if the farmer doesn't grow food and has nothing else to eat, he will literally die, and those thoughts will die with him? I don't know what you think about it. How does he answer that? But how, in the Cartesian philosophy, are we to account for the ideas of rain and earth under our feet and crops ready to pick in the autumn? These ideas are not dependent on real things. They have not come into the mind through the senses. Stuart agrees Catholics have a better sense of humor. I totally think so. And we're allowed to use vulgarity and drink, but not get drunk and not curse or swear. But not everybody understands that. There's just some subtle distinctions, I guess. For the mind is a closed compartment into which no sense knowledge can leak. These ideas, Descartes concludes, could come only from God. It is he who put them in the mind, and they are known, as we have seen, intuitively and independently of things outside the mind. Descartes was convinced that God was a good God, as we shall see, and that he would not deceive mankind. Therefore, he argued, if God has put such ideas as those of rain and earth in our minds and has given us the irresistible conviction that they actually do exist outside of us, then such things must actually exist. Otherwise, God would be a deceiver, and Descartes had already decided that God was not deceitful. Man, I might have to wiki Descartes and see what the outside world says about him, because he sounds kooky to me. And I always thought, his little saying was cool, I think therefore I am. I'm like, yeah, makes sense. This coffee is so cold. It's ice cold. What Descartes is really saying is that we do not actually know things in the world. We know only our ideas, but because God is good and could not deceive us, we take it on faith that there are things outside the mind which correspond to our clear and distinct ideas. Strange it is that the father of rationalism should make us accept the whole world, even our hands and our eyes, our wives and our children, on simple faith. But this is the only way out of his dilemma, created by a theory of knowledge, cutting the mind off from reality and from sense knowledge. Objects can be known only through God and through our knowledge of his goodness. They exist only because the idea is in our mind. And God, who is good, has given us the idea. The same irresponsibility and the same tyranny remain. The world of reality must more than ever conform to whatever clear and distinct ideas we have, for otherwise God would be deceitful. Descartes convinced himself of the existence of God by following out his idealistic method in logical fashion. The proof, reduced to its simplest form, runs like this. Oh, we are on part 6, in case you're following along. The proof reduced to its simplest form runs like this. I have an idea picture in my mind of an infinitely perfect being. I cannot have created this idea picture myself, for I am a finite, imperfect creature. This idea must come from a being of infinite perfection, namely from God himself. Therefore, God exists. This proof for God's existence is corroborated by another Cartesian proof, which is equally invalid. The idea of God, Descartes maintained, contains all perfection. But existence is a perfection. Therefore, he concludes, God exists. The Cartesian proof for God's existence is no proof at all, for it is based on the illicit transition from idea to thing. It is the tyranny we mentioned above of concluding that the world of reality must conform to my ideas. I have an idea of God. Therefore, there is a God to correspond to my idea. Descartes only proved that he had an idea of God, but he skips sophistically from the idea to the thing. His idea of God includes the note of God's existence, but this only proves that existence is a quality of the idea and not, as Descartes concluded, an attribute of the thing outside the mind. Such a quick skip is understandable, of course, for more reasons than one. In the first place, it follows logically from the Cartesian method and from the innate, intuitive, and idealistic quality of his knowledge. Cartesian rationalism always goes backward, from ideas to things. In the second place, we should remember that Descartes' greatest concern was to establish an objective world. We know our ideas, he believed, but we must establish the existence of the world, which we cannot know directly. Now, the only way to do that was to postulate the existence of a benevolent, perfectly good God. So Descartes rushed into any proof he could find. The proofs were bad, but the conclusions were necessary for Descartes' system and for his peace of mind, so they were accepted. God was of little account in Descartes' system except as the guarantor of material things. After his existence and his perfection had been postulated, and thus the reality of the material world guaranteed, God could be forgotten in the Cartesian system. He withdraws into his heaven and leaves the world to Descartes. The father of modern philosophy had indeed resolved to devote only a few hours a year, quote, to metaphysics, for he believed he had completely mastered the subject in a single analysis. The rest of his time he would spend on much more practical applications of philosophy. Descartes' picture of God did him harm in several ways. In the first place, it was anthropomorphic. God is conceived of as a human monarch raised to the absolute of perfection. His qualities are man's good qualities without limitation, and thus his laws will be like the monarch's laws, depending on his good pleasure alone. He thus comes to be the arbitrary lawmaker, with emphasis on his will rather than on his intellect. Divine law, eternal law, natural law become not so much the ordo rationis of earlier philosophers as the lex voluntatis of modern times. See what I mean? People catching the Latin references? That's a long time ago. He thinks Catholics are reading it. And they did know Latin. Even George, the friendly truck driver, knows Latin, my older brother. That was such a funny thing. So when we were saying the rosary on the way up, hats up to Stella for that, keeping my faith alive, my hope alive. My son, who I sent to like this super tiny Catholic school because I knew I wasn't up to the task of teaching them all the old school stuff, he said, "Do you know it in Latin?" And I said, "Do I know the what in Latin?" He says, "Do you know the rosary in Latin?" And I said, "No." And he said, "It's twice as powerful if it's said in Latin." I mean, those kind of rules seem a little funny to me. But anyway, so George, the friendly truck driver, texted me at this moment. And I guess I told him what was happening. And he said, "Hey, is there anything I can do? I know I'm far away." And I said, "Say the rosary in Latin." And he said he was doing it. Now he knows the Hail Mary in Latin. Funny. Anyway, I don't know that stuff. Law resides now not in the nature of things, but in the fanciful and arbitrary will of the supreme lawmaker. Thus, Cartesian philosophy reinforced Calvinist theology and carried along the voluntaristic trend of later medieval philosophers. Okay. At the same time, it prepared the way for the deism of later rationalists by pushing God back into his heaven and leaving the world to man alone. Right? Weren't the founders deists? Wasn't Thomas Jefferson a deist? Even more important, and certainly ironic, coming from the father of rationalism, another field of reality is marked out of bounds for human reason. Descartes had made man take the world of material things on faith. Now he insists that, while God's existence and perfection are proved by reason, the field of theology is not to be entered by man. Descartes apparently wanted to safeguard faith by isolating it from reason. But what can reason do in the Cartesian system of clear and distinct ideas, in a field of mystery and of speculation? There is no room for such speculation about God and the mystery of the infinite in the Cartesian system. In this system, to quote Maritain, theology, if it is not reduced to philosophy itself, is only an exercise of ignoramuses chattering about the unknown. The whole field of theology, then, is marked out of bounds for reason, and man is told to rely on revelation alone for his theological knowledge. Theology and philosophy are sharply separated by the father of modern rationalism, and philosophy alone is the province of reason. I always was taught and kind of felt that you could reason the existence of God. And that's why I was like, you don't need faith. But then I found out you have to have faith. So I'm working on it. Descartes was an obstinate divider. His clear and distinct ideas necessitate a dividing and a subdividing into atoms of knowledge, which, when once they are divided, can never be brought back together. The most important single cleavage which Cartesian philosophy accomplished, however, was within man himself. For Descartes cut man's mind away from his body, wrenched it out of its habitat, and never managed to get it back again. He had started to build his philosophy, we will remember, by clearing everything out of his mind and imagining that he knew nothing. Then he came to the conclusion that he could not doubt that he thought. He knew his thought by an immediate act of the intellect, but that is all he knew. He could therefore say of himself nothing except that he knows himself as pure thought. And this he says, I, that is my thought. Again, I, or my mind. Descartes therefore knows himself as pure thought, and he defines himself as a thinking machine. I mean, that's modern, for sure. This is a clear and distinct idea, and therefore Descartes concludes that there is a reality corresponding to this idea in the world. It is the reality of a thinking machine, which is himself. He did not claim he was mind alone, of course, but the mind is distinct from the body, and the mind alone is known directly. His body, Descartes must take on faith. The mind for him is nothing but thought. It is clear and distinct, and it has no connection with the body, no matter what seems to be the case. What then of sensation? Bodies cannot be the cause of our ideas, for ideas are innate. So sensation comes to be considered by Descartes as an idea awakened within the mind on the occasion of a change taking place in the body. How to connect changes in the body machine with ideas in the mind becomes a problem to plague Cartesians through the centuries. Since there can be no causal connection between the body and the mind, which Descartes has so cleanly and so definitely separated, and since the mind is pure thought and the body is mere extension, their only possible point of connection must be in God. This is torture. This is why I didn't get philosophy when I was in high school or whatever, because most of it's nonsense. I mean, this guy is saying like this is nonsense, but it should all be written like this. Like, look at this nonsense. And then you would get it. Like, as a kid, you'd be like, oh, yeah, that does seem stupid. Various explanations of this union are proposed by Cartesian followers, but not by Descartes himself. For as Leibniz put it, at that point, Monsieur Descartes withdrew from the game. Leibniz himself sought to explain the union by his system of pre-established harmony, whereby God, in his perfect wisdom, had ordered all things from the very beginning in such a way that every modification within a body would be accompanied by a corresponding modification within the soul or mind. Are you kidding me? But that means there's no free will. Let's see if he goes there. There is no causal connection between these modifications except in God. Spinoza, some people say he was the best, resolved it in a different way. Pantheist that he was, so that God isn't everything, he had concluded that God was the only true substance, and he, God, was therefore the common source of the parallel attributes of thought and extension which had to flow from that substance with the same necessity, so that every mode of extension had to have an equivalent mode of thought. Yeah, I mean, if it's all in, if we are God's dream, yeah, I mean, the dream is the dream is the dream. But I don't know. A third explanation was offered by Malebranche. But I don't think we're God's dream because there are laws and we have free will. And like the quantum thing, it's too orderly to be a dream. And then the ability to affect its direction independent of others who are also affecting its direction. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Anyway, Malebranche, his occasionalism stated that God directly causes us to have an idea on the occasion of a change occurring within our body. When I see this book, which is a sensation, God gives me the idea of book to correspond to the sensation I have received. These are, of course, all rather complicated and uneconomical explanations, yes, of a problem that Descartes had created and failed to solve when he said, I, that is, my thought. Now, as the mind is pure thought in Cartesianism, so the body is mere extension. The consequence of this dualistic concept of man is put well by Gilson when he concludes, metaphysics, then, is pure spiritualism, and physics pure mechanism. The body becomes, a little messy. The body becomes a mere machine, a clock made up of wheels and wires and springs and locks. This is one of the terrible inhuman results of a Cartesianism from which we suffer today. Man's body is no longer human. It is the machine in which I, that is my thought, is somehow located. The thought rents the body as the tenant rents a house. It lives there for a while, but no real union, no intimacy develops. It is merely a matter of convenience. The soul is not affected by the body it inhabits, nor does the body take on anything from its tenant. Dude, there have been these like convoys of cops. I'm like looking at a highway. I've seen like 3 or 4 of them. One was 30. I think it's like these politicians doing like a world tour, like all, I don't know who are in the cars, but it's a voyeuristic, but it's also so self-serving. And the National Guard has me shut out of my neighborhood, and there's 30 cops on the highway maybe once a day, every other day, escorting some black SUV. I mean, anyway, so I'm hearing sirens. You're probably not. It's so hard for me not to resort to vulgarity when I'm discussing these things, but I really don't like to junk up this particular series with that. Gilson concluded, metaphysics then is pure spiritualism and physics pure mechanism. The body becomes a mere machine, a clock made up of wheels and wires and springs and locks. This is one of the terrible inhuman results of Cartesianism from which we suffer today. Man's body is no longer human. It is the machine in which I, that is my thought, is somehow located. The thought rents the body as the tenant rents a house. It lives there for a while, but no real union, no intimacy develops. It is merely a matter of convenience. The soul is not affected by the body it inhabits, nor does the body take on anything from its tenant. This body machine, which the mind is said to inhabit, has under Descartes been stripped of its dignity, its sacredness, and its intrinsic worth. It has become a machine or a retort or perhaps a vacant house. It is to be experimented with, scrutinized, analyzed. It is to be retarded with sedatives, speeded up with stimulants, and its reactions are to be studied like those of a racing motor or a doped racehorse. A straight line of connection can be drawn from Cartesian mechanism down to the inhuman experiments conducted in concentration camps by Nazi physician mechanics, experiments to which the human body was subjected as guinea pigs and rabbits had been in days gone by. I think there are plenty of people in the United States who were doing that too, and England. The world was horrified to see what was done. Descartes would have been horrified too, but he could hardly have opposed it on the grounds of his philosophy about man. He said the body was a machine. The Nazi physician mechanic, or even his American brother scientist, takes Descartes at his word, and like a good mechanic takes the body apart to see what makes it tick. Descartes' concept of the body as a machine whose essence was extension was taken literally in his Man a Machine, published in 1768. La Mettrie insists on giving Descartes credit for engendering the view that the body is a piece of machinery. Quote, this celebrated philosopher was the first to prove completely that animals are true machines. Descartes had treated man in rough fashion, and the idea picture he created in his mind, two separate, clear, and distinct idea pictures rather, showed little resemblance to man he exists. Resemblance to man he exists. I don't know, I get that. The man of Descartes' mind was broken into two complete substances, joined to each other no one knew how, neither Descartes nor anyone else. There was the mind or the soul, which was nothing but thought, on the one hand, and on the other was the body, which was nothing but geometric extension, to which God had added motion from all eternity. The Cartesian picture of man can be likened to an angel in a machine. The angel was in the machine, in the pineal gland, Descartes thought, about the way the driver is perched in the cab of a bulldozer. But Descartes had never seen a bulldozer, so we might keep the body picture Descartes undoubtedly saw in his mind and say that he saw man as a pure spirit in a lifeless body. Man to Descartes was a ghost in a corpse. Weird. Interesting. Descartes is of tremendous importance in the intellectual history. Oh, this is part 8. Sorry, I keep skipping this. Descartes is of tremendous importance in the intellectual history of the modern world. From him flowed all philosophy initiated in modern times. Wow. Rationalists carried on his work and tried to perfect the temple of knowledge he had not finished when death overtook him in 1650. They tried to show how ideas are innate, how we know nothing but them, and how we can still give an adequate account of the world about us. They tried vainly to bring about some sort of connection between the body and the soul, and their failure made impossible the equilibrium between the spiritual and the material formerly ascribed to man. So now we have to go back and try to reestablish a mind-body connection, right? Isn't that all the rage? We get that from yoga, but see, as long as you get it from yoga and not from Christianity, it's probably no threat to the system. Okay, some philosophers carried on Cartesian spiritualism, and they soon came to the utter absurdity of denying the world, and in time, even their own minds. In this way, philosophy committed suicide. Other philosophers concentrated on the body machine, and they ended up materialists by denying the reality of the spirit and of everything except matter and motion. In this way, philosophy died of malnutrition. So, some philosophers carried on the spiritualism that denied their own minds, which committed suicide, and some concentrated on the body machine. Yes, I was taught always to feed the soul. That's why you had to go to communion. That's why you had to pray. You had to get grace, but that you had to feed the soul. More specifically, Descartes breaks from the intellectual tradition of European philosophy, and this was a serious loss. For this was a tradition which went back to the Greeks, yes, and included such names as those of Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Seneca, St. Augustine, St. Thomas, and St. Bonaventura. Though it was in a bad state of degeneration when he repudiated it, nevertheless there was much that was good and much that was valuable in the remains of scholastic philosophy. This, too, Descartes threw overboard. Had he rescued nothing more than the realistic, common-sense attitude held by these scholastics toward philosophical questions, he would have done the modern world a great benefit and saved it from much madness. But to get rid of the mice on the ship of philosophy, and it was full of mice, he blew up the ship and watched with smug satisfaction as it settled into the sea of oblivion, mice, men, and all. Valuable stores of knowledge were lost. The wisdom of generations was blotted out of modern man's mind. The lessons of the past were discarded. Techniques and methods, attitudes and viewpoints built on centuries of experience were destroyed. Descartes was an obstinate divider. He cut modern philosophy off from the past, and he made the break clean and sharp and complete. So he's the soldier who went into the Iraq Museum and smashed all the figurines. He burned down the Library of Alexandria. He created a self-contained system of thought, which was bad enough in his own day, but was not to bear its bitter fruit of frustrated thinking and of skepticism for many generations. It was an inhuman system which cut man away from the world about him and shut his mind up within itself, which made it impossible for the philosopher to look out on the world from his ivory tower and see whether there was any connection between his golden threads of theory and the world of men plodding wearily through the mud at the base of his tower. He could no longer check his thought by experience. Neither could he derive fresh material for thought from the world of men pushing about him. He could not even rely upon his own senses to furnish him with material for ideas. He had to retreat upon his mind and find therein the universe of thought from which he sought to derive a universe of reality. I mean, I would like to just sit him down, strap him to a chair, and just say, all right, get in touch with the nuclear reactor that's buried deep in your brain. The plans for the nuclear reactor. Tell me all about how that works. Just think really hard. His view of man did violence to human nature and gave to the modern mind a twisted concept of man. Man is made a creature of pure thought who happens accidentally to inhabit a corpse. The complicated but undeniable interaction of the body and the soul on each other is made an insoluble problem. The senses become unimportant, and sense knowledge becomes at best some sort of mechanical action caused by God through his laws of motion. Man's affective life is completely neglected, and feeling becomes something like a confused idea. The relationship of the body and the mind, separated so patently by Descartes, will be reasserted in more recent times, but the old balance with Descartes, which Descartes destroyed, is never restored. Some philosophers and religious people will assert a dominance of mind over matter so naively and so simply that you believe in time that a strong enough wish can literally move a mountain. Or winning the 100-yard dash is a matter of strong concentration. But most thinkers come to assert a deterministic influence of the body over the mind, so that in modern times, bad thinking has come to be looked upon simply as the result of dyspepsia or glandular trouble. We know today that the mind does influence the body, and the body has influence on the mind. But Descartes obscured the problem of their mutual influence long ago, and he created all sorts of obfuscating conjectures that are only now being dissolved by observation and by common sense. As Cartesian dualism does violence to man, so the criterion of truth Descartes set up, the clear and distinct idea, does violence to the world of nature. The world simply is not made of neat little mosaics, each item clear and distinct, sharply separated from all the others and independent of them. But so Cartesianism would have it. Descartes is the sire of that modern type of mind, which divides everything into sharply formed and clearly perceived and distinctly placed atoms. This is the mind which thinks things are true if they are clear and sharp and distinct. This is the mind which does violence to whatever is not clear and distinct, for it makes it so and thus compresses it into the already made molds of the mind. Ultimately, Cartesian rationalism tended to be destructive of reason itself. It denied rational processes of obtaining knowledge and posited an intuitive process whereby man obtained his clear and distinct ideas by a kind of illumination. Descartes denied man his reason and gave him the spirit of an angel, a pure spirit unencumbered with a body, a mind that is pure thought and knows things immediately without taking those steps that men as rational beings must take. You know, when people say don't judge, my uncle used to say, you have to judge. It's the only way to figure stuff out. You have to judge. You're in a constant state of judgment. True, false, good, bad, right, wrong. You have to judge constantly. Descartes further limited the use of reason by denying it knowledge of anything but its own ideas. He denied that it could really know material things. It had to accept them on faith, as Catholics accept the mystery of the Trinity. And he went even further. So he's pointing out that the Catholic doctrine is not about that, except for with specific things. God, the mystery of the Trinity. He went even further. He forbade man the use of his reason in studying theology. This, he said, was subject matter to be received submissively and passively and non-understandingly on faith. One was not even to try to understand it. Thus, at the very beginning, rationalism became a barren thing. The mind could only concentrate on itself, and it is no wonder that philosophers began to wonder whether there would be left anything at all to study. All right, we're wrapping it up now. Descartes, standing at the very threshold of modern philosophy, showed clearly how dangerous a thing philosophy could become when it took its sights off the mileposts of reality and began to wander it knew not where. He showed how absurd and how far removed from common sense philosophy could easily become. When a man can identify himself with his thought alone, when he can say I or my mind, it is time for him to quit philosophy and become a farmer or a bricklayer. Not enough philosophers in modern history have become farmers or bricklayers, and the result is that philosophy has earned a bad reputation for itself for saying things that the man in the street with good sense of reality readily condemns as nonsense. Thus, philosophy, unfortunately for itself and for the man in the street, unfortunately for all of us today, was itself discredited. Descartes' failure is most consequential, for in most men's eyes, his failure was the failure of reason itself. He is indeed more responsible than any single man in modern history for the discredit into which philosophy was to fall, for its withdrawing from reality and from the position of direction which it should exercise over society. That's what he's saying is the single greatest thing. Philosophers will tend through modern times to stay in their ivory towers and to leave the helm of modern society to be tended by scientists, and today at least by psychiatrists and nuclear physicists. Descartes opened the door to all of this. Hume expressed the sad plight into which Descartes had plunged philosophers. That's funny about psychiatrists because my uncle gave me a book called Plato, Not Prozac. And he also gave me Boethius, Boethius. I don't think I got to either of them, to be honest. Hume expressed the sad plight into which Descartes had plunged philosophers when he said, at the end of his Treatise of Human Nature, I am affrighted and confounded with that forlorn solitude in which I am placed in my philosophy. Hume was intelligent enough to be affrighted and confounded. Most modern philosophers were not. And you'd think we'd be going to Hume next, but we're not. We're going to Locke next. Locke next. Not Loch Ness. Common sense and compromise. That's Locke. I don't know what we're going to think about that. I was kind of raised to like Locke, right? But I think he's a little, whatever, more than that. Then we probably heard about. Hi, Jack. I see you've come and gone. Okay, so I'm only going to go to the Monica. Stella, Monica, your vulgarity restraint is noted and respected under the circumstances, particularly. Yes, thank you, because you can imagine how many people I would like to describe in vulgar terms. Yes. Who sent me Gavin Newsom? They call him gruesome. He already put out his 2030 Agenda 2030 plan for LA. I mean, and he did all these like hand signals like Clinton used to use. So he's obviously slated for the 2028. I'm still here. Hi, Jack. Right, I am. Hello. I'm not seeing anymore. I'm going to take a break. Thanks for sticking with me, for listening to my little diatribe in the beginning. I'm super cheered. That definitely got me to like change my like the the chemicals that were firing in my brain or whatever this guy would say. But it was great to be able to connect with you all. I was getting, last night was the first time I really got down because was feeling down because somebody told me, a few people were saying it's indefinite how long we're staying out of the city, of our houses. And just after that kind of uncertainty is too much, but they did some updates and I really don't think it's going to be that long. But I was really bummed because I've got these dumb, literally dumb animals. I gotta, gotta get the gang back together. I gotta get the gang back together. I have laundry to fold. I have smoke to remediate. I got stuff to do, and I'm happy to say that I guess some of these people are on their feet and just thinking forward uh, and thinking about rebuilding. Let us pray. Let us pray they rebuild that lovely little town. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This is Monica Perez. Until next time.